social media is impacting the financial markets and creating new ways for companies to raise capital, but also creating new ways for investors and wealth managers to discover new investment opportunities. So with that, I thought that we'll start with each of you introducing yourselves and talking a little bit about yourselves and background and company. So we'll start with you, April.
So my name is April Rudin, and I'm an entrepreneur. I founded my company 4 years ago, and I created a firm that specialized in wealth marketing strategy because I could foresee that in terms of Wall Street, in terms of the markets, that there were probably going to be high net worth individuals. The middle class is sort of disappearing, unfortunately, and then we have the end group. So, and I've always been sort of a techie, geeky sort of girl, so believe it or not, I always give my age. I'm 52. I'm a social media expert. I have plenty of time during my day to do it and make sure that I can teach others to do it also. I think one of probably the most important trends and things that I follow in terms of wealth marketing is the fact that first of all, I wouldn't put Facebook down as much as everybody's put it down because Facebook has been a transformational platform in terms of social media. So whatever the IPO is and whatever the company's worth, I think it's sort of changed really the entire landscape for us. But what I wanted, the main point that I think everyone should take away from here, the reason why I think crowdfunding is going to be so successful from a social media standpoint is because the new wealthy is not baby boomers, and it's not even Gen X, it's Gen Y and millennial, because we have lots of succession planning, very successful succession planning going on now, with money being transferred from baby boomers to younger generations. We have lots of wealth creation through IPOs and through technology products. And so being on social media platforms, for me, is sort of an adapt or die, and I work with lots of Wall Street firms that are just about, pulled, kicking and screaming onto social media platforms. So I think it's really important for people to understand that today's young wealthy, today's wealthy are really younger investors, and so the kinds of deals and kinds of opportunities and things that they're going to be interested in and their ability to understand social media is twice as much as probably anyone in this room now.
Hi, my name is Sean Carr. I'm on the faculty at the University of Virginia's Darden Graduate School of Business. I am also a director of something called the Batten Institute for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, where we do not only research, but we also have a number of programs for students, an incubator, and a significant endowment behind it. My area of academic research is in the social embeddedness of economic transactions, how economic transactions exist within a social context, and looking at how that context influences how those transactions play out. So I became keenly interested, both from an entrepreneurship perspective, but also from my more academic perspective on how crowdfunding is evolving the way we understand how social capital influences financial capital, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment.
Hi, my name is Robert Dobbins. I'm the founder and CEO of Consortia Business Funding, Inc. We are a crowdfunding facilitator. We're launching multiple platforms based on various focus groups, one of which is crowdfundingkids.com. And I've been involved in internet marketing since the 90s in one form or another. I started a brick and mortar business 9 years ago using crowdfunding methods. So I like to say I was crowdfunding when crowdfunding wasn't cool. And I'm very glad to be here today and look forward to speaking with you.
I'm Gene Massey with Media Shares. We started crowdfunding in 1998 of movies under cinemashares.com. We got an issued U.S. patent for crowdfunding movies in 2004. It's a business method patent. My investors in New York said, whatever you do, don't mention movies anymore. So we became mediashares.com. Movies are bad investments generally. Media Shares, as we described earlier is a transactional platform for effecting crowd-funded investments in a regular IPO. We work with FINRA brokers to help sell an IPO using social media techniques, one of which is a live internet broadcast that's allowed during the quiet period even. Under SEC Final Rule 33-3871, you can actually have a live, not recorded, internet broadcast during the quiet period, and that's one of the ways that we reach out through social media to a crowd and get interest in an IPO. We use all the other techniques that everybody else uses, you know, using the different Twitters and Facebooks and things like that to help sell the IPO. Once the S-1 is declared effective by the SEC, you can actually sell to non-accredited investors. The difficulties that you see and the reason for all of these new crowdfunding methodologies is basically to avoid having to go through the IPO process, which requires an S-1 registration statement, a certified audit, and is subject to a great deal of regulations. And all of the new crowdfunding laws were designed to eliminate that expensive and very onerous process. But we decided a long time ago, we were doing this before the crowdfunding came into play. We were effectively crowdfunding using the regular IPO process, and that's what MediaShares does.
So, Gene, let's start with you, because when we first met in person in December, we started talking about Facebook's IPO. And you came up to me and said, you know, you said what Facebook should do is they should do a direct IPO, they should cut out the underwriters, and you know, they should use our tools. They should use MediaShares. And I actually wrote an article about that on how Facebook's IPO could have transformed the IPO market. Obviously, it didn't happen. It was a dismal failure. So talk a little bit about, you know, how it could have been. Not that I like coulda, woulda, shoulda. I don't believe in that, but what could have been.
Or what will be, rather.
Okay, that's more optimistic.
Will be. You see, in an IPO, when you do an underwritten IPO, a company sells all of its shares to the underwriter, and then the underwriter sells all of those shares through their network of brokers on the phone to their customers. Of course, there are institutions that buy large blocks of shares, but the reason that you have brokerages, how it started out, was they have a whole network of brokers that they can sell the stock to. That's really why you need an underwriter, somebody to sell your stock to. Facebook did not need an underwriter. They did not need an underwriter because they already had several 100 million people, direct contact with those people. They could have very easily sent them an email and said, how would you like to own at least one share of Facebook? And if someone had gone on that website and bought one share of Facebook using our using direct registration, Facebook would have had direct contact with those shareholders. They would have had their demographic information, and perhaps most importantly, they would have had their payment information. They would have had their checking account payment information from the purchase of the stock. That would have given Facebook 200 million shareholders. Let's pretend for a moment that everybody bought a share. They would have had 200 million shareholders, had all of their payment information. They would have known how much they make from their suitability form that they've filled out. They would have had their address, and they already know what you like. So they could have conceivably been the retail behemoth of all time because they know what you like, and they say, David Sinclair, won't you please click here since you're a scuba diver. We already have your payment information, and check out this new scuba tank. And you, as a scuba lover, would click there and say, wow, just click here and it's mine. Okay. They would have made it very easy to have a retail machine that they could then market to all of their advertisers. Right now, there's a big question about Facebook, how are they going to monetize some of these things? You know, well, it's very simple. They would have had all that in a database. They could have monetized their entire advertising and had a payment structure already in place, knowing what everybody likes. But it's hard to go up against a major underwriter who comes to them and says, you know, we're going to buy all your stock. You don't have to worry about a thing. We'll take it all from you right now. And as a matter of fact, Facebook even wrote their own prospectus to start with. I think they did it primarily as a means of negotiating their fee. They ended up only paying a 1.9% commission to the underwriters. The underwriters were glad to do that because they naked shorted the hell out of it, and they made a ton of money on it anyway, so they were glad to do it. And the whole thing is a dirty business. It's not clean. It's not, why don't we invest? Why don't we, I give you some money and we watch you, help you grow. We'll be your customer, your user, and your shareholder, and watch you grow and participate in that growth. Instead of that, there's all this dirty electronic trading and algorithms and naked shorting and the whole, that's what the whole business is. That's the problem with the business right now. It's all dirty and greedy and everybody's trying to make a fast buck, electronic trading and all the, I get carried away, I'm sorry.
Yeah. All right, well, let's get back to social media. Sean, you've been researching.
I thought I was on the wrong panel for a moment.
You've been researching how founders, how their pre-existing social networks are influencing the patterns of investment on these crowdfunding platforms. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and talk a little bit maybe about some of the findings.
Yeah, great. And I was really glad that Gene was able to give his presentation a little while ago, and that a few of the other panels have picked up on this idea of the importance of social relationships in this social media world as we move into an era of crowdfunding. But some of the examples that you gave, Gene, were terrific. I can guarantee you, and one of the side streams of my research is in financial history, I can guarantee you that the gentlemen gathered under the buttonwood tree all knew one another by name. That in the Dutch East India Company, that its initial shareholders all knew one another by name, and they could vet for one another and also vouch for the nature of the venture. There was not a lot of, as the economists like to say, information asymmetry. There was a lot of symmetry. But crowdfunding does create some asymmetries. You have people who know a lot and people who know a little. But how do we get around that? And it's most of the research that's out there now there aren't that many academics looking at this, and most of the data right now is coming from Prosper, so Prosper.com. Because they make their data available on a daily basis. So we have some interesting findings there. So I'll start with that, and then I'll talk about some other models in a moment. So one thing we know, what it means, and this is de-emphasized. This is going back to Prosper pre its 2008 SEC certification. So a lot of the studies were done at that time, but recently getting published. So getting published now, found that for those listings that had friends, listed friends and indicated their friends, and had friend lenders, it increased their funding probability 2 times. Not only that, those listings, those borrowers who had friends, who indicated friends on their listing, and who those friends were, also had lower interest rates. But here's the really interesting part. It's not just that lenders acknowledge that perhaps these are a better bet, and so we're willing to fund them and we're willing to give them a better rate. But it turns out that on the average, those borrowers who had friends, listed friends, had default rates lower by 9% on average. In fact, they were a better bet. So the friends and actually do matter, these social relationships do matter, but it's not just unique to the lending model. So there's a recent study by a colleague of mine at Wharton, Ethan Mollick, who's just looked at some of the Kickstarter data. And he found, so now it's not perfect, but he looked at all the Kickstarter campaigns and to date, and looked at those which also looked at the entrepreneurs or creative project creators if they looked at their Facebook networks. So let's call them entrepreneurs on Kickstarter. If the entrepreneur had 10 Facebook friends, their campaign was going to get funded on average to about the 9% level. If they had 100 Facebook friends, they were going to reach the 20% level. And if they had 1,000 Facebook friends, they were going to reach the 40% level. Those are significant because if you, as Yancey Strickler likes to say, if you reach that 20% level, you are more than likely going to go all the way. So the friends matter. Now, it's interesting because there's another study that I've been looking at where we've looked at the geography of crowdfunding. Like, where are investors coming from? Where are the entrepreneurs coming from? There's a lot of research. So another one of my areas is in venture financing, and venture capitalists on average, exist, live, have offices roughly 70 miles, no more than 70 miles from the ventures in which they are doing their funding. If you look at least there's one study done on Celiband, it was mentioned earlier. Celiband, for its investors and entrepreneurs, which are musicians, on average over the course of their campaign, 5,000 miles, 5,000 kilometers, so roughly 3,000 miles from one another. But here's the interesting part. The majority of the investors at the early stage, up to the $20,000 level, all came from the immediate area and were all family and friends. So we can't just look at the crowd as a monolithic entity. And particularly at that early stage, we're talking about a different class of people, a different sort of people. And so understanding those personal relationships, and I think the example we saw with the coffee machine, points out how important understanding the personal networks are on that front end, both for the entrepreneur, the person raising funds, and for the investor. Because if I'm the investor, I want to know who else they know, and that was a point that was made in one of the earlier panels.
Oh, that's really interesting.
I want to make a comment on
Feel
that.
free to jump in.
The thing that comes to my mind is the ultimate social networker, someone who really used social mapping and used that probably to their biggest advantage, took advantage of all the people close to them, chose different platforms, places like country clubs. Am I ringing a bell with anyone here? That would be somebody who was probably the best social networker. We talked a little bit today about Enron, but in my mind, probably Bernie Madoff was the best social networker. He took advantage of all of his social networks. He took advantage of all of the people close to him. He socially mapped himself to every person that he could.
I want to follow that point.
I know.
Point, yeah.
If you really wanted to pick a role model in terms of social networking, you'd have to have a product. Okay, that would be different. But when you talk about where your platforms are, where your networks are, they're all the people closest to you. They're all the people that you know best. And how do you amplify your message and take each one of those people then and amplify it? It would have to be Bernie Madoff.
But that's a terrific example because here's where we are in a brave new world. Bernie Madoff was successful because his social network and the ways in which he engaged his social network were completely opaque.
Yes.
With crowdfunding today, at least as it's practiced today, and Kickstarter and most other platforms, it's almost completely transparent. And so the fact that I can see who else has invested, who else has made a commitment, and I think Somolend is another example of where you're seeing reputational factors being woven into the evaluation of a borrower or an entrepreneur, perhaps, as this future goes forward. Bernie Madoff would not be Bernie Madoff if everyone knew who all his investors were.
I think Bernie Madoff made it pretty obvious who a lot of his investors were.
But it was all secret.
Well, I think that the investment was opaque, right? But his investors were.
But they never all knew one another.
Well,
there was never a public listing where I knew.
Well, no, there was not a public listing, but I think one linked him to another one. In other words, people would bring their friends.
He leveraged his personal network for his own benefit, but not for the benefit of the others in that network.
No, but his platform was the country club. His platform was his group of, his network. He leveraged his network. What was opaque most of the time was the investment. That's what was opaque, and hopefully crowdfunding, what I know crowdfunding will do is make the investment less opaque, but also I think that was part of his sales secret was to say that certain people were invested.
And this is
so
where
you
I
should be
think
too.
the idea that perhaps there are opportunities, particularly in early stage investments and at the front end of early stage investments, where there can be a collective due diligence that occurs because of the transparency that's provided.
Well, you make a really interesting point because, you think about, you compare crowdfunding or buying stock in the public markets. You don't know who else is buying in the public markets, but, look what's happening on Facebook. Our friends are influencing our purchase decisions. We're liking things that they like, and they're influencing, getting to a point where now, the social networks will be influencing our investment decisions.
Right. Now, nothing I'm saying is particularly novel if you come, and there are probably people in this room who come from the venture capital community or even the angel investing community. You pretty much know who else is involved in a deal. It's not listed on a public website necessarily, but it is a very personal business. And I think what crowdfunding offers is that those interpersonal connections, more transparency for a broader set of smaller, but a broader set of investors.
What I think is also important is for people to realize that there are different behavioral investing habits from baby boomers, let's say, to next gen. And so baby boomers might ask for a referral or ask you, Daryl, what are you invested in? And they may act on that investment without doing due diligence simply because they have a good relationship with Dara and
I can
believe
give
in
an
her
example
trust.
of that.
But I was just going to add one other little thing, which is that next gen, that would be Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, supported through lots of data. What they'll do is they'll definitely ask for the referral, but then they do an additional step, which is they Google it. So if you don't have a presence or if there's anything negative or anything on the internet, they have that extra sort of step where they're doing the vetting. So.
I can support that behavioral thing. In the Pabst beer crowdfunding, it was 100% beer drinkers.
Right. There you go. Well, speaking of baby boomers and babies, kids today are growing up in a social media world, and everything is being done through our social networks. So, Bob, maybe you could talk a little bit about that generation, especially with you, crowdfunding kids, and kind of how this next generation is really going to embrace social media and how it's different.
Sure. I grew up in what used to be known as the land of opportunity. That was Arkansas state model before they became a natural state. My grandfather told me what that meant was every opportunity you got out. And what he meant basically by that was that there was very little opportunity there. So it was kind of a play, of course. And as a kid growing up there, I took advantage of the opportunities I had. I had my lemonade stand when I was 9. I mowed lawns when I was a teenager, shoveled snow, when we got snow, mowed lawns and raked leaves and washed cars, whatever I could do within my limited, social circle. Right? That's the world that I grew up in. All right, teens today, they were born, with a birth certificate in this hand and a Facebook ID in the other. It was handed out to them at the hospital, basically. So they're living in a much wider engagement platform than I was. So they are not necessarily. I'm not going to say they're not mowing lawns and that. The kids in my neighborhood don't mow lawns. They got a service, but they are going to the technological side of things that they understand for, one, vetting ideas on what they want to do with their life, what they want to do next week, and how they want to proceed with pretty much every decision. Makes me think of Minority Report. All right, the movie Minority Report. The guy's got this big virtual board up in front of him, and he's just like whizzing through stuff. Okay, not that, not that, that. Me, I'm like this. Okay, let me think about that. And the kids today, though, they're vetting information so quick because they were born into this world where they're vetting that information so quickly.
Well, it's also interesting. Kids can't open up a lemonade stand here without, paying thousands of dollars in a permit to the government. So,
yeah, and and they have, like Wikipedia was mentioned earlier. They have Google available to them. If I wanted information when I was growing up, I had to go to the library, and I was limited by that there. So decisions on how to engage things is made a lot differently by the millennials. Just on the way over here, I says, well, I'm on the plane. I'm going to read my Pop Sci edition. Oh, lucky me. Education special, teenage inventors, $50 experiments, and labs that go boom. All right. It's talking about kids, innovative kids all across America, 15-year-old that has developed an early cancer screening method. All right. You have you have an 18-year-old, she was actually 17 when she developed this, cancer cell targeting nanoparticle.
That's
all right.
wild.
TED Talk, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these are awesome. But they would not have been able to do this without the internet.
Wow.
Because if you go to their stories and read their stories and see how that they've engaged the world around them, you know, they could not have done it in the world that we grew up in, you know, as baby boomers or what have you. They have the internet. They have this social media. They're able to exchange ideas freely and openly, not with just the people across the room and across the city, but across the country and around the world. And they are using that. And I do foresee that, you know, from a crowdfunding perspective, that these young teens that are launching these projects, like this guy here that has just found a way to make a 23-pound, dollar-wise, 23-pound solar panel,
Wow.
all right, from human hair. All right. This guy is 17 years old. A teen innovator who invented a cave radio that can go down to a depth of 1,000 feet in solid rock, and still transmit back up. It's going to save lives. I mean, just thousands and thousands of lives. 13-year-old who has launched her own business, okay? Another 13-year-old who is developing a lollipop that cures hiccups. But all their information they culled through social media and through the internet. They all will tell you they went to Google, you know, they talked with friends, they Facebook, they you know, had discussions even with other people around the world on what they were doing, you know. What are you doing in Africa to cure hiccups, you know? Oh, well, Grandma says do this. Well, Grandma was right on some things.
My 7-year-old son has discovered what makes time travel possible. So I'll keep you posted on that.
Right, send him to my platform. I want his idea there.
So, April, you recently wrote a really interesting article that I really enjoyed reading called "Wealth Gets a Facelift," and you talk about how to attract and engage, you know, this new millennial client. But what I thought was really interesting in that article was you had a stat in there that said Gen Xers and Gen Yers were worth $10 trillion in 2004, and their combined wealth is predicted to be at least $28 trillion in 2018. Now, how could we attract some of that capital to the crowdfunding market? How do you think that tech-savvy group will embrace crowdfunding?
So I think it's through it's two things. It's through the behaviors that we've talked about. In other words, the younger generation is naturally going to go to the internet to look for lots of different things, whether it be capital or clothing or the weather or any information. They're just going to go to the internet. I think the best way to engage, right, is through some of the old practices. You know, having been in marketing and PR for 25 years, you know, there still are a lot of the, you know, standard things that still apply. So as I'm listening to some of these deals and people talk about putting their deals on crowdfunding platforms, what I find is probably the biggest miscue is that people who go to attract younger generations sometimes will use words or use concepts that don't resonate with them. I started to talk about that a little bit before. For example, when you say to a baby boomer, you know, our financial institution has been around in business for more than 100 years, you find baby boomers nodding their heads and saying, yes, you know, 100 years, that's fabulous. And what you find through research is the opposite is true. Not only does it, you know, is it neutral, let's say, to younger generations, actually negative to say that you've been around for 100 years. So they're actually looking for lots of new things. The way to engage them is through new ideas, new products, new firms. They have a lot less loyalty, which is another big differentiator between previous generations and next gen. You find that older investors, baby boomers, typically have one advisor. even high net worth, maybe one, maybe two relationships. You might find that younger investors, younger wealthy, have lots of different relationships with lots of different wealth managers. They may go directly and invest directly themselves. They don't have any loyalty to a particular manager or asset manager or broker that they're working with. They also want to do things more in a mobile way. It's another big engagement thing that I don't think was talked about too much today. You know, it used to be that that thing, it's got one here. This used to be, well, my first one like this was in a bag that was about this big that I took in my car, and that was my very first mobile phone. And now it turns out today, you know, more than 65% of what comes across that mobile device is really data. So I think that those firms that are able to engage and provide data in a mobile way and in a very usable way are going to be the ones that really attract these new young wealthy. So it's going to be the reporting. They want to see their information mobile. They want to see where they are mobily. They want to transfer funds. And typically financial services has probably been, I think this was mentioned today, you know, probably the most, you know, Luddite industry ever, the most laggard industry outside of retail banking, which I think has been pretty promising. You know, remote deposits and all of that has come up, but the rest of it is pretty low tech. And that's because of the demands. They've been lagging, right? So what's happening in terms of Wall Street, I think, is firms are starting to realize, and even some of the larger firms that I work with, the warehouses, using social media, but they use it in such a lockstep way that it's almost social media. So they're not still going to reach those end users that they want to reach. So I think those smart firms are, and you know, whether it's crowdfunding or any sort of financial services, have to reshape their messages and how they reach, right, younger investors who are going to really hold the purse strings.
Well, Sean, here's an interesting question. Since you've done a lot of research on crowdfunding investor motivation, would you consider, I mean, what would you consider the most important factor when they make their decisions? Would you consider it what their peers are thinking? Or, you know, even, you know, it's interesting, you know, we just saw, you know, Gleb's presentation and on you know, the espresso machine and how, you know, it was, you know, you know, media outlets that actually took a liking to the product and that, you know, that appealed. What would you think is the most important part of that decision making?
I'm trained as an economist, so I'll say it depends. But it does depend. It depends on a host of factors. It depends on what model we're operating under. Obviously, if we're talking about something that's donation-based and Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Rocket Hub, the campaigns that are there, or we could be talking about Kiva, for instance. You know, the motivations may be driven by a coolness factor for the product itself, some affinity for the entrepreneur, the quality of the video, tugging at the heartstrings at some social cause that is important to that investor or potential investor. And those motivations will remain unchanged. What I think is occurring as we will now have other opportunities to invest in through securities, either in debt or now in equity. Other motivations not replacing the other, but being you know, additional to it. So I think what I'm seeing as we have this truly explosion of platforms, that the platforms are each going to find their niche. Not only in terms of what model is right for them, but what kind of entrepreneur or fund seeker they're trying to work with, what constituency they want to work with, and also what kind of entrepreneur. I think having Kickstarter itself is not as well known as it has become and as large, is not the supermarket. It's as everyone knows, it's highly curated. It's more like, I don't know, the Museum of Modern Art. I mean, these are kind of hand-picked. And so you're seeing a rather select group of opportunities in which to make donations and seek rewards that will probably endure, but we'll see other things available. So I don't have a really good answer to say, well, it's going to be A, B, or C. I think we're going to have a whole menu of choices to make. Now, it's possible that there will be aggregators who will figure out how to pull all this together under one roof, but in the meantime, I think we will see different groups being responsive to different motivations, whether that's what's in their heart or their mind, and also where they want to spend their dollar and maybe earn some dollars.
Well, with the, there's going to be a slew of new.
I'm not going to defend it.
Based on the fact that they are only successful in 1 out of 10 deals, I wouldn't want to be an investor in one of their deals either, so thank you very much.
Sure thing,
That's
sure
a good
thing.
point.
But the idea that it is a bit of a roller coaster out there in a Wild West. I am where I remain optimistic, but again, more research needs to be done. We don't have facts to support it. I can't tell you right now whether this notion of a collective due diligence is going to be a solution or the solution or even a solution. There are probably multiple levels at which investors can be protected. Now, whether investors can be successful, that's a whole other matter.
But, that also brings me to the point of discussing the general solicitation rule because, something else that I've written recently, which is, Mad Men meets Wall Street. If you can think of any worse mashup in the world, that would be, the advertising industry meeting, type A Wall Street guys, right, from hedge funds. Deep pockets coming to really, talk about what their products are. And I think that is going to be a really scary place. And that, as far as I can tell, outside of, things running downhill through the FTC, you're going to have Wall Street really with their deep pockets coming up and creating all kinds of enticing ads that will, look like a shiny penny to consumers and essentially will have them bypass the expertise of their wealth managers, right? So I compared it to like prescription drugs. You have people coming to their doctors and saying, I need Ambien. Instead of saying I'm having trouble sleeping sometimes, they request a prescription drug by name. So I can see lots of people coming and saying, I want XYZ hedge fund. How come I've never heard of it before, right? And whether or not it's suitable, you're putting all of those things aside.
I think they'll say social media via the internet on people's telephones.
Yeah.
Top that one.
Yeah, I know.
That's done.
Bunch of comics at this table.
Right.
I can't keep up. Look, the social media is in effect a combination of all the technologies that have gone before it, enabling us to talk with, see, understand, and know more about one another than any of those other technologies. So you mentioned the ticker tape. That was just a step in the right direction. But in the way I look at it is, the social media technologies of today, and we're just at the front end of this process, really take us back to the gentleman under the buttonwood tree, of being able to know one another. Maybe with not that degree of intimacy, but it gets us far better than where we were with a phone or with email, or certainly the ticker tape. So yeah, this is cataclysmic in the sense that it blows up the current model and gets us to a new one, a better one potentially, a somewhat scary and frightening one right now as we're all trying to figure it out. But it's certainly an exciting time to be at the cusp of this new environment.
I would say that the biggest change has been that telephone really was a one-to-one interaction. It was one person calling one person. I think for me, on the opposite end, social media, which to me is a giant fad, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, any of these, I can foresee none of these platforms being there. I think there'll be just a place on the internet where everything will be aggregated about me and my business and my family and whatever. I think, but what social media has really done is to change the way that we interact. Social media itself, in terms of a word, I think will go away just in the same as, dedicated word processor or IBM PC or some of these other tech changes. But I think the most fundamental takeaway that all of us can take from this, all of this, is that we have more transparency, we have more information, and we're better able to make decisions on our own.
Sweet. Well, I just want to say one thing, Gene. I was going to say that my prediction is that the fashion from your ticker tape slide comes back.
And it will.
I would like to give a serious answer.
Okay.
There will, 500 years from now, is something I often quote to people. You know, I would love to know what it's like 500 years from now. I really and truly think they will look back on this time as the most fascinating time in history, in every way. In the transformation of our government systems, the things we're going through now is really just the birth of things. Despot leaders are getting rid of those, and the financial system is going to totally reform itself. And that's what we're really seeing now, is we're seeing the birth of a new financial system. And when you see a baby born, it's hard to imagine it as a college graduate. And so what you're seeing now is all of this mess and all of these people saying this regulation, this and that, it'll all be worked out. It may take 100 years, but it'll turn into something truly wonderful. And this way of crowdfunding, I think, will be the future.
That's great. This was a really fun panel. Thank you, guys. I really enjoyed it.